That winter night, the temperature in Red Hollow dropped so low that people said a man could freeze to death in 10 minutes, and yet, in a dark alley behind the saloon, a widow stood in the snow with her starving daughter. She wasn't begging, she wasn't crying, instead she looked at the lone rancher standing before her and said something that would haunt him for the rest of his life: just one meal. I'll do anything. What happened after that moment changed 3 lives forever. The winter of 1891 was the cruelest anyone in Red Hollow had seen. The wind screamed through the empty streets like a wounded animal. Snow piled against doors and windows, burying the town inch by inch. Most people were already inside their homes, hiding beside warm fires, but Ethan Cole wasn't most people. The lonely rancher stood outside the saloon, pulling his coat tighter around his shoulders that he had just finished buying supplies for the long ride back to his ranch, nearly 20 miles into the mountains. Ethan liked it that way, far from people. Far from memories that he was about to mount his horse when he heard something strange. A voice, soft, weak, barely louder than the wind. Please. Ethan froze. The voice came from the dark alley beside the saloon. At first he thought it was just the wind playing tricks, but then he heard it again. Please, just one meal. And when Ethan stepped into the alley, he found a woman and a child standing in the snow. The woman looked no older than 30, but hardship had aged her. Her dress was torn, her hands were shaking from cold, and beside her stood a small girl, no more than 6, clutching her mother's sleeve. The child's lips were blue, her eyes hollow with hunger. The woman straightened when she saw Ethan. She didn't beg, she didn't cry, instead she said something that stopped Ethan cold. Just one meal. She swallowed hard. I'll do anything. The wind howled between the buildings. Ethan stared at her. What kind of anything? He asked quietly. The woman met his gaze. Work, she said firmly. I can sew, cook, clean, mend saddles, anything honest. She placed a trembling hand on her daughter's shoulder. My child hasn't eaten in 2 days. Silence fell between them. For a long moment Ethan said nothing, then he asked a question that surprised her. When was the last time you ate? The woman hesitated, then whispered, 3 days. Ethan Cole had once believed in people. Years ago he had a life filled with laughter. Then sickness came through the valley, and took everything. After that, Ethan stopped believing in kindness, stopped trusting the world, stopped letting anyone get close. Living alone in the mountains was easier, safer, but now he stood in that freezing alley staring at a starving child, and something inside him shifted. Come with me, Ethan said. The woman blinked in confusion. You want me to work? Yes. But first, Ethan nodded toward the street. You're going to eat. The stable at the edge of town smelled of hay and horses, but it was warm, and to the woman and child, it felt like heaven. Ethan lit a small stove and opened his supply bag. He had planned to stretch the food for weeks. Instead, he placed bread, dried meat, and beans onto the table. The little girl stared at the food like it might disappear. Go on, Ethan said gently, eat. The child looked to her mother first. The woman hesitated, pride battled desperation, then she nodded, and the little girl ate, slow at first, then faster, until tears streamed down her cheeks. It was the first full meal she'd had in days. Ethan turned away quietly, because something about watching a starving child eat made his chest hurt. Later that night, as the storm raged outside, Ethan finally asked her name. Mei Lin, she said softly, and this is my daughter, Lily. She explained how her husband had died months earlier in a railroad accident. Without him, everything fell apart. No one wanted to hire a foreign widow. Some men offered money, but not for honest work. Mei Lin refused. I would rather starve, she said quietly, than lose my dignity. Ethan studied her across the fire. This woman had nothing. No home. No money. No protection, yet she stood straighter than most people he knew, and suddenly Ethan realized something, that he respected her. The storm lasted 2 days. When the skies finally cleared, the town was buried under snow. Mei Lin prepared to leave. We will go, she said. We have already taken too much from you. Ethan shook his head. You're not going anywhere. He told her about a ranch family 40 miles north, good people, kind people. They needed help, but the road there crossed dangerous mountain passes. Mei Lin looked down at her daughter, then back at Ethan. Will you take us there? Ethan hesitated. Helping them meant responsibility, risk, connection, everything he'd spent years avoiding. but then Lily reached out and grabbed his hand. Her fingers were small, cold, trusting, and that decided it. The journey nearly killed them, snowstorms, frozen rivers, hungry wolves howling in the distance. More than once Ethan wondered if he'd made a terrible mistake, but Mei Lin never complained, not once. When Lily grew weak from cold, Mei Lin held her against her chest for warmth. When the horse stumbled in deep snow, Mei Lin climbed down and walked beside them, step by step, through miles of wilderness, through wind that could freeze a man's lungs. And slowly Ethan realized something surprising, that he wasn't just protecting them, they were giving him something too: purpose. 3 days later they finally reached the northern ranch. Warm light glowed in the windows, smoke curled from the chimney, and for the first time in months, Mei Lin smiled. The ranch owners welcomed them inside. They offered Mei Lin work and a place for Lily to grow up safe. That night Ethan prepared to leave. His job was done, but as he saddled his horse, Lily ran out of the house. "Are you leaving forever?" she asked. Ethan hesitated. Then Mei Lin stepped onto the porch. The wind moved gently through her hair. "You gave us a future," she said softly. Ethan shook his head. "No," he replied, "you gave me one." Spring arrived slowly in the mountains. The snow that had buried the valleys for months didn't disappear overnight. Instead it melted little by little, retreating from the hillsides like a defeated army. Thin streams of water began to run through the fields, carrying away the last pieces of winter. For the first time in weeks, the air no longer felt like knives against the skin. Birds returned, grass pushed through the thawing earth, and the world began to breathe again. At the Dunn family ranch, life slowly settled into a new rhythm. Mei Lin worked from sunrise until evening. Her hands were rarely still. Some days she repaired torn coats and mended worn saddles for passing trappers. Other days she helped Mrs. Dunn cook large meals for travelers stopping at the ranch on their way through the mountains. Her sewing became known across the region. Men who rode for days through snow and wilderness trusted her work more than anyone else's. They would walk into the ranch house, remove their worn coats or broken gear, and say the same thing: "Is the widow here?" And when they saw the careful stitches she left behind, stronger than the original seams, they always left satisfied. But the biggest change was not the work that it was Lily. When Ethan had first found her in that alley, she had been quiet, almost too quiet for a child her age. Hunger and fear had stolen something from her. Children who spend too long surviving forget how to simply be children. But now, slowly, that changed. The ranch became her playground. She ran through the open fields chasing butterflies. She followed Mr. Dunn around the barn asking endless questions about horses and cattle. And every morning she waited eagerly for the traveling schoolteacher who passed through the ranch every few weeks. Lily loved learning. Words fascinated her, numbers amazed her. Within months she could read simple books, and her bright mind soaked up every lesson like dry earth soaking up rain. Sometimes Ethan would sit quietly on the porch while she practiced reading aloud. Her small voice would stumble over difficult words before proudly finishing the sentence. Those moments always made Ethan smile, because when he had first seen her, he wasn't sure the child would survive the winter. Now she laughed constantly, and laughter filled the ranch house like sunlight. But Ethan did not stay, not at first. After bringing Mei Lin and Lily safely to the ranch, he returned to his own home deep in the mountains. His ranch had been empty during the weeks he was gone. Dust had gathered on the table, the wind had crept through cracks in the walls, and silence filled every corner of the house. Once, Ethan had believed that silence was peace. Now it felt different, lonely. For days he tried to return to his old life. He repaired fences, checked his cattle, chopped wood for the remaining cold nights, but something had changed inside him. At night he would sit by the fire and find himself thinking about the small ranch house miles away, about the warm kitchen filled with voices, about Lily asking him questions about horses, about Mei Lin standing quietly near the stove, her steady eyes watching everything around her. He told himself it was foolish that he had spent years avoiding people, avoiding attachment, avoiding the pain that came with caring. But every day the silence of his ranch grew heavier, until finally one morning he saddled his horse, and rode north. He told himself he was only checking on them, just making sure they were safe, nothing more. The ride took nearly a full day. When the ranch finally appeared on the horizon, Ethan slowed his horse. Smoke rose from the chimney, the barn doors stood open, life moved there. When he rode into the yard, Lily was the first to see him. She had been feeding scraps to the chickens. Suddenly she froze, then her face lit up with pure joy. "Mr. Ethan." She dropped the bucket and ran toward him as fast as her small legs could carry her. Ethan barely had time to dismount before she threw her arms around him. "You came back," she said breathlessly. Ethan laughed softly. "Looks like I did." Behind her, Mei Lin stepped out onto the porch. For a moment she said nothing, she simply watched him. There was no surprise in her expression, only a quiet understanding, almost as if she had known he would return. "You're welcome here," she said gently. That night Ethan stayed for dinner, then he stayed another day to help repair a broken fence, then another to help Mr. Dunn move supplies before the spring rains arrived, and slowly, without anyone saying it out loud, Ethan became part of the ranch, not as a visitor, but as someone who belonged there. Months passed, spring turned into summer, fields filled with green grass, travelers came and went along the mountain road, and the ranch house grew warmer than it had ever been. Some evenings Ethan and Mei Lin would sit on the porch long after sunset. They didn't always talk. Sometimes they simply watched the stars appear above the mountains. Two people who had both lost everything. Two people who understood silence. Two people learning that life did not have to end after tragedy. One evening Lily sat beside them on the porch steps. She looked up at Ethan with serious eyes. "Are you staying?" she asked. Ethan hesitated. It was a simple question, but the answer carried more weight than she knew. For years he had lived alone, believing loneliness was safer than love, but looking at Lily, looking at Mei Lin standing quietly beside the porch railing, he realized something important. The storm that winter had changed more than just their lives. It had changed him. He rested his hand gently on Lily's shoulder. "Yes," he said softly, "I think I will." Lily grinned and leaned against him, satisfied with that answer, and as the last light of the sun disappeared behind the mountains, Ethan understood something he had not felt in many years: peace, not the empty quiet of isolation, but the warm, living peace that comes from sharing life with others. The lonely rancher who once believed he needed no one, had finally found a home, and it all began with one desperate bargain in a freezing alley, just one meal, for anything, but in the end, what Mei Lin had truly earned was something far greater than charity. She had earned respect, she had earned a future, and together, they had built a family.